record this, so folks that can't join us now can watch later. My name is Michael Santori. I'm the editor of today's American Catholic, and I just wanted to thank you again for coming to our event this evening on God's Quad, Small Christian Communities and Campus Ministry. I'll introduce our panelists in a moment, but for now, I just wanted to give you a few notes on how things will flow this evening. First of all, if I could kindly ask people to mute themselves, except for our three panelists, that'll be much appreciated, just to reduce background noise. Thank you so much. Our intention this evening is for this to have kind of the feel of a synodal gathering rather than a formal event. So I'm going to introduce the panelists who will each take a few minutes to present on the themes of campus ministry and community building. They'll share some of their experiences and insights. And then after they speak, we'll take a few moments to gather ourselves, and in a kind of synodal spirit, we'll reflect and discern on what we've heard. And then rather than me being just the sole interlocutor or moderator, we'll invite everyone's input and questions and reactions and kind of see where the spirit moves in all of this. I know we have a lot of different themes to touch on here, so I think it'll be a very generative conversation. For that portion of the evening, I would ask if you could kindly use the raise hand feature in Zoom. If people are familiar, there's a little button called reactions. You might see something that says more. If you click that, you'll see a reactions tab. There's a small hand that says raise hand. That way we can see you in the participants column, and it'd be a little easier to facilitate the question and answer portion. And at any time during the evening, I'd also invite you to put your questions in the chat. You can direct them to all of us. You can direct them to me or any of the co-hosts, and if something comes to mind. And just so everyone's aware, as I mentioned, we are recording this for our website and for later viewing. So I suppose in the last kind of, as we wait for a few people to just trickle in from the waiting room, I'd ask that we maybe begin in a just a moment to center ourselves in silence and to pray. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us this evening together to listen and to learn from one another. We ask that you help us engage in a dialogue that inspires new ideas, relationships, and practices, so we may continue to realize your beloved community. We ask this as we ask all things, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Oh God, amen. So let's see, we'll just take a second. And on to our introductions. I'll introduce the panelists in the order in which they're going to present this evening. So first we have Kevin Ahern. Kevin is a theological ethicist and a public theologian. His research focuses on the significance of Catholic institutional ministries and Christian social movements. He's an associate professor of religious studies at Manhattan College, and he's also the past director of the Peace and Justice Studies and Labor Studies programs there. Kevin is the author of Structures of Grace, Catholic Organizations Serving the Global Common Good, which is also available from Orbis, as is, I should hold up, God's Quad, our focus this evening. Kevin's edited several books, including the award-winning Visions of Hope, Emerging Theologians in the Future of the Church, The Radical Bible, and Public Theology in the Global Common Good. He's a past president of the International Movement of Catholic Students. So he brings a lot of expertise to this issue, and we're excited to hear what he has to offer. Following Kevin is going to be Paulina Halley. Paulina is a recent graduate of Yale University, and she's a former participant in the Leadership Roundtable's ESTEAM program, which, for those who are not familiar, stands for Engaging Students to Enliven the Ecclesial Mission. Paulina is currently based in New York City, but I believe joining us this evening from California. So thank you, Paulina. And our final presenter will be Joe Healey. Joe is an American Maryknoll missionary priest with 50 years experience working with small Christian communities in Africa and elsewhere. He's taught small Christian communities as a new model of church in Africa today in Nairobi, and he's also taught a similar course at Hekima University College in Nairobi. Joe is the co-author of Small Christian Communities Today, Capturing the New Moment, also available from Orbis Books, and he's the author of Building the Church as Family of God, Evaluation of Small Christian Communities in Eastern Africa. And he serves as the moderator of the Small Christian Communities Global Collaborative website. So a lot of experience here. I suppose with that said, Kevin, if you'd like to take it away, thank you.
Sure. I was saying to others earlier that we got so good at Zoom a few years ago, but now you get a little rusty. Good evening, all. Good evening to I see a number of friends and people I've met along the way, along this path, and good to see you all, and good to see others. I don't know. I'm down here near Maryknoll and Ossining, and it's a gorgeous evening. So if it's a beautiful night where you are, I'm sorry you have to be in a Zoom with us, but so thanks for taking the time. What I was thinking to the conversation after COVID is leading us to rethink what we're doing as church. I think I remember the moment of Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square, in that empty square. Maybe we can think back to that moment, one of the most powerful moments I've ever seen on a screen. And we have to realize that the way we've been doing things have to change, at least in a different way. And I think synodality is one way in which the Holy Spirit is leading us to rethink things. So what does it mean to rethink campus and young adult ministry in a synodal key? So this was a bit of what we were trying to do with our project God Squad. We launched this a few years ago, right before the Synod on Young People, Faith and Vocational Discernment that happened in 2018. So a collaboration with Orbis Books, with Maryknoll, but also with the International Movement of Catholic Students, we wanted to highlight some best practices of communities of students and communities of young adults in the United States and worldwide as a type of a way to try to find things that we could feed into the synodal process. So in addition to collecting some of these best practices, we had a number of listening sessions. We had a session at Hekima College in Kenya. We had one in New York City at America Media. We had one at the Jesuit Curia, just right in Rome, just before the meeting of the Synod. Part of this was strategic. We issued a statement, a 6-page statement, our 3-page statement with 6 points that then was distributed to members of the Synod that met, mostly at that point, bishops and some observers. And so we were trying to have an impact on the conversations that were happening in Rome at the Synod, talking about young people, by bringing the voices of young people into that space. So a lot of what's happening now as we're talking about synodality, right? There's some elements there. In 2019, Pope Francis issued his post-synodal apostolic exhortation as a letter to young people, Christus Vivit, right? So this is 2019. It's almost 4 years ago this week that this letter has happened. We might consider this evening, has that letter had any impact on how we work with young adults and young people and college students and post-college students today? The verdict might still be out on that one. As part of our research, as part of our investigations, we were looking at the state of the student church, the state of the young adult church, and we discovered what I call a broken path. The path with young adults in the church is marred by a number of missteps or a number of challenges or obstacles, including a myopic approach to evangelization, right? Where only one feature of the church's evangelizing mission is highlighted to the detriment of others, maybe focusing only on one element of liturgical life and not talking about the social life, or one element of talking about social justice and not the other elements that make up the holistic view of the church. Consumerism. There's also this new term that's coming up called the unbundling of religion, where young people are interested in picking one thing from another, and it's a challenge from bits and pieces from different religious traditions. The outsourcing of ministry is a challenge, where professional groups almost as consultants are coming in and taking over ministries. A major issue, and this is something I have to say, I see a lot as a white man, old man, right? The lack of cultural diversity in many of our programs. That was something that several of our authors in our book mentioned. disconnects between the official doctrine and the experiences of young people, what the Springtide Research Institute identifies as value gaps, right? A lot of young people have different sets of values or ideals than what they hear coming from their pulpits or from religious leaders. Clericalism and paternalism, right? Young people are often double victims of clericalism and paternalism. Not only are they, and patriarchy, not only are they lay people, but they're also young, and they can be doubly marginalized, right? We have the fallout from the sexual abuse crisis. We know that. The lack of investment in targeted programs for young people, the pressures on young adults, jobs, relationships, et cetera, especially even after college, where life gets a lot more complicated. And this last bit, the parish to campus parish transition, where young people might be active in an active campus ministry if they're lucky enough to be in a place to be that. And then they come to New York City or Boston or LA or Chicago or some other place, and they go into a parish and there's no space for them to take a leadership role. So, but there's good news. Our project identified 24 different experiences from 9 different countries. These are something I would call laboratories of participatory ecclesiology, spaces where young people can be leaders or be the first apostles to other young people with themselves.
Excuse me, Kevin. Folks, if you could kindly mute yourselves, please. I'm sorry.
Asking me if
all right. So our project looked at several different best practices, I would say, and we have some of them featured here. And these were modeled. I think we could explore this notion of participatory ecclesiology later. But young people are being trained in these communities at different places. But we also realized that the college campus, or we could talk about the space where young adults are operating, might be best seen as a new mission territory. And as we were going through this project, I was reminded of that famous book from 1943 by French worker priests working with the young Christian worker movement. Is France a mission territory, right? And that opened up a whole conversation in France. I think we could ask the same question for youth and young adults today, right? Is the world of young adults in the United States and elsewhere and beyond a new mission territory? And what does that mean? The numbers are not very good, in my view, right? These are old, these are a bit dated now. We need new numbers, but I don't think they've improved since COVID. The vast majority of college campuses in the United States, for example, do not have any targeted pastoral ministry for them. This is especially true for students who are at community colleges and colleges without the high income levels of a place like Boston College, Fordham, places where I've gone, or Yale, or Ivy League schools. Places like Bronx Community College does not have a campus ministry in the same way as a Fordham does, which is just a mile down the road. There are questions there that we should be thinking of and exploring. This has obviously declined with COVID, so this new mission territory. So I think Pope Francis calls us to rebuild the trail. The trail is broken. I don't know, maybe I'm in a Boy Scout mood these days, right? The trail is broken, but I think we need to rebuild this trail. And one way to rebuild this trail is synodality. Pope Francis, in his letter to young people, Christus Vivat, talks about youth ministry has to be synodal. It should involve journeying together, right? It has to be moving towards a participatory and co-responsible church. This is very relevant to a lot of us here, I imagine. No one should be excluded and no one should exclude themselves. So you could go back to Christus Vivat and number 206, right? Young ministry with young people has to be participatory, synodal. I think this is really useful. But how? And I'll end really quickly on this. First, we need more data. We need more data on the state of the church among young people. There are some good institutes already out there. Springtide Institute, for example, does amazing things. Pew, Tara, et cetera. But we need a new study on the state of young adult groups in the church in the United States, a more comprehensive study. 2, we need to prioritize the creation of youth-led small communities on campus, right, and in parishes. Right? We need to create spaces where young people, when they come to a place like New York or Boston, have a very easy path into a community that makes them feel welcome, and their leadership skills can be tapped into. And third, we need the human and financial investments in this. I think one thing that has transformed a lot of community organizing in the United States has been the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. It would be phenomenal if we could find something similar to that to jumpstart local initiatives and national initiatives on youth and young adult ministry. So we need to rebuild this path, and the way to do it, in my view, is through synodal and participatory models like small Christian communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. I love that historical parallel with the worker priest movement in France, and thinking about this as new mission territories. Hadn't quite ever heard it expressed that way, but it's very exciting and kind of opens the mind. Thank you. So Paulina, would you like to build on this or respond? I'm sure there's some resonances with what you'll have to offer.
Yes, thank you so much. So I would just like to give everyone sort of a brief, somewhat biographical, anecdotal account here of why I'm a speaker today. So I am one of those representatives of the young adults, a recent college grad who had an amazing church community throughout most of my life. Growing up in a parish, I went to Yale. I graduated in May 2021, and I was really involved with the St. Thomas More community there, which was incredible, amazing resources, amazing groups, so many different initiatives, and so many amazing people that I met through that program. One of those people was Angela Crowley, who, thanks to her, I'm here speaking today. She's really kept me involved. And I think that's a larger point that I'd like to make, is just the importance of having people keeping you accountable, especially when you're in this sort of like life transition stage, and just keep pulling you back in. I think that was so important. And I thankfully had that through Angela, who was my mentor. As Michael mentioned, I was a member of Esteem, which is this very small student cohort group at St. Thomas More at Yale. There are a couple Esteem groups sprinkled throughout the nation at different universities. The whole program is aimed at sort of equipping young Catholics to grow into leadership roles, grow into just be more involved participants in the Catholic Church through adulthood. So my experience upon graduating has been a little just hard to make sense of. I've moved to New York City, so that's where I'm based. And I do live with my sort of built-in Mass buddy, as I would say, my sister. And we do go to Masses as often as possible when we can, but I know that I am looking for just a more solid community, just something that's more established, a group of people that continue to pull me in, continue to keep me involved, and just a group that sort of meets me where I'm at. I think the fact of why I'm here, and that's thanks to Angela again, is because I think there's so many talents young people have to offer, so many things we want to contribute, but don't necessarily know what the paths are to do that. We don't really know what our place is, I would say, in the church. A lot of experiences today as a young adult feel like they are at odds with the experiences of being a Catholic. So I think that's a major struggle in just sort of reconciling these different parts of our identities. I think the answer is certainly community. So also while I was at Esteem and still in university, Angela helped me form an SCC with my Esteem cohorts once we were in lockdown and out of campus. So that lived on Zoom for a while, and it was amazing. It was definitely what we were looking for. And it was also the first time that us students were in it was a virtual room, but we were in a room, only us together. Prior to that, we had either been with our sort of program director, program leader, and mentors. So conversations felt pretty different. And once we were in this virtual room together in the SCC format, it just felt like we this collective sigh of relief. It was like, that was an amazing program. We loved it, but we definitely needed a space for us to speak more candidly, openly, and just about the topics that we wanted to address. I think, yeah, it was one of the best experiences I've had in terms of feeling like I'm exploring my faith more intimately, because I was doing it alongside people who were so like-minded and in a very similar life stage. So I think I am all for Kevin's hypothesis on the college campus being a new mission territory, and just that being a very important place to sort of invest resources right now. Not necessarily, well, certainly the college campus, but also the sort of transition paths and just guardrails for moving into the next stage of adulthood, having sort of just in-person communities and virtual communities. I think hybrid is definitely the best solution for a lot of these things, but just having those formats where we can share our talents and speak openly and carry out service projects, things that feel important to us.
Thank you, Paulina. That's excellent. I love what you said about meeting people where they are. I think is such an important thing, and not to impose standards from without, but actually listen from within. What do you need? You tell us, and how do we facilitate? So thank you for bringing that out. Father Joe, would you like to take it from here?
Good evening. My topic is how to reach Catholic young adults today, a variety of voices and quotations. People may ask why an 84-year-old priest is giving a talk to Catholic young adults. Well, allow me to share this story. At our first class on small Christian communities at Tangaza University College in Nairobi, Kenya, the students, all in their 20s, started calling me elder as a title of respect. But I said, no, not yet, not yet. Give me another name. So they came in the next day and started calling me the youth from a long time ago. I like that a lot better. Now, to follow the excellent presentations of Kevin and Paulina, I'd like to share a variety of voices and quotations on this topic to stimulate our reflections and discernment. And I'll draw on examples from Kenya and from the United States. I start with the most important people, Catholic young adults. One, a Catholic young adult leader said, please don't use churchy language with us, young adults. Synodality is churchy. Use walking together. Please don't use Latin. Working document is enough. You don't need instrumentum laboris too. And then a young college graduate said, after college, I searched for a spiritual home in the most logical place, my parish's young adult group. And it was fine. They offered the sacraments and adoration and occasional praise and worship sessions. All that were beautiful experiences. They offered lectures and fellowship at the local pub. Again, perfectly fine evenings. But I was looking for something else, something more. What I now realized was missing from these groups was a safe space where one could be vulnerable, be honest, and feel at home. And three, a college student in the Christian Life Community gathering at Santa Clara University, the day before exams, she said, I need this period of prayer, reflection, and faith sharing to ground me for the intellectual challenge and pressure in the busy exam days ahead. 4, one college student had this insight. We young people today are not necessarily angry or opposed to the Catholic Church. We simply feel it is not relevant to our lives. The litmus test for many of us Catholic Gen Zers is not Mass on Sunday, but service projects, immersion trips, and other outreach activities. And one college student, this is number 5 at Michigan State University, said, I was a devout Catholic who went to a Catholic high school. And then in my freshman year at Michigan State, I dutifully participated in Sunday Mass on the campus. Then I began to drift and didn't find Mass that interesting. I joined an evangelical church on campus that had lively singing, a band, and entertaining sermons. But after a few months, I felt something was missing. I had an unfulfilled yearning, desire, hunger for something more. Finally, I discovered I really missed the Eucharist at the Catholic Mass. And so I returned to the Catholic Church on campus and now feel very nourished by receiving Jesus Christ every Sunday in the sacrament of the Eucharist. And number 6, finally, my grandniece, Charlotte Haggerty, said to me, Uncle Joe, in your homilies and talks, you should always use humor. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the research studies. We already heard about CARA, and they put out a survey that asked the question, how to invite young adults to participate in small faith communities in the United States. One respondent said, if I had this answer, I would be the most famous person in the world. Another CARA study, number 8, and this is striking, 60% of the Catholic young adults, and we're talking about ages 18 to 35, their faith community activities in the United States are outside the parish. That is, they participate in faith-related small groups. We heard from Kevin about Springtide Research Institute, which reports more than 50% of the Catholics ages 13 to 25 said that they don't like to be told answers about faith and religion. Going to Kenya, last year, 2022, a youth in Kenya is any person between the ages of 15 and 30 years. Presently, Kenya has a population of 75% below the age of 35 years. 75%. The Catholic Bishops' Pastoral Department in Nairobi did a survey in Kenya on Sunday. Where do you find young Catholics on Sunday morning? The results, you do not find them outside of church after Mass. You find them on social media. And then this training team for Amasea had this insight. After consulting many young people, we came up with a format for listening sessions of 10 to 15 young people, especially college students. When a student coordinator was asked, what's the most important part of the gathering? She immediately answered, food. Another student used the mantra, feed them and they will come. So at different sessions, we always start with pizza or tasty sandwiches. To the Synod and the U.S. National Synthesis, and then finally the North American Synthesis. This is what it says. This reflects a longing among people of God for a meaningful encounter with Jesus Christ. And finally, we have a small Christian community Facebook page, and it had this entry. Remember the famous line from the musical, The Sound of Music? When God closes a door somewhere, God opens a window. Well, with the COVID-19 pandemic, it closed the door of in-person gatherings on college campuses, but then Zoom opened the window of online gatherings. Thus, college students began using Zoom to meet and reflect together, just like Paulina referred to, and also alumni began using Zoom. Now I go finally to individual voices and quotations. Pope Francis, how many of you young people spend 2 minutes reading the gospel of the day? And he held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes a day. Bishop Daniel Flores, when interviewed after the drafting of the North American Continental Synod Synthesis in February 2023, just last month, had this sad statement. We have failed to incorporate the voices of Catholic young adults in this document. And I go on now to 17. Cardinal Michael Czerny in Rome said, The biggest challenge in the Catholic Church today is the gap between young people and the institutional Catholic Church. Father Tom Rees said, lectionary-based Catholics can change the world. If we can get Catholics to read the Sunday scriptures every week before they come to Mass, it would be revolutionary. If you do not read and pray the scriptures, you are not an adult Christian. A sister, Mary Evelyn Jagan, said, my nephew drifted away from the Catholic faith and stopped going to Mass on Sunday. Every Thursday, however, he visits an elderly man in a nursing home and gives him a shave. Now my nephew goes to Mass on Thursdays. And then finally, the cardinal in charge of the Second Bishop's Office for all of Africa said, the privileged place to experience family and synodality is the small Christian community. So these are some voices and some quotations. As I continue with deep listening, and that's very important, to young adults, as we walk together, I hear that an encounter with Jesus Christ and a personal relationship with Jesus Christ are very important to Catholic young adults, both on the right, the conservative, traditional, devotional group that emphasizes Jesus as one's personal savior and Mass and adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. And on the left, the liberal, progressive social outreach group that emphasizes Jesus as a social justice activist and shares his ministry to the marginated and those on the peripheries of society. I find that Catholic young adults today are responding positively to retreats and recollections days, in person, online, and hybrid, that focus on a personal relationship with Jesus Christ with more emphasis on silence and on small group reflection and sharing. Nigerian theologian, Father Stan Elo, based in Chicago, Illinois, recently pointed out that people who are leaving the Catholic Church and joining the Pentecostal churches do it for various reasons, especially the Catholic Church's failure to point them to Jesus. So what are our conclusions? Here are some takeaways. 1, reaching Catholic young adults today is both very difficult and very important. 2, we have to reach out to Catholic young adults today where they're at, on their terms, in their language and styles, in their priorities. Often this means interacting on social media, including Chat GPT. 3, Catholic young adults are searching for community. That's what Paulina said. And mutual support, including small faith-sharing communities, both in person, online, and hybrid, where they can feel at home with their peers and have a safe space to share and seek together. And this can happen in both campus small communities and alumni small communities. 4, mentoring is important. Both younger people mentoring young adults and young adults mentoring young adults, like to like, peer to peer. This is young adults evangelizing young adults. Finally, let us listen to the Holy Spirit as we walk together, as we journey together. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Father Joe, for invoking those images of unity in the encounter with Jesus, and also for leading us beautifully into, I think, a reflective moment of silence. Maybe our synodal spirit this evening, we could just take a moment and kind of gather ourselves. We just heard a lot of really illuminating and I think insightful discussion starters. So if we could just maybe take a second, and then we'll begin our discussion. Okay. As we move into kind of the second part of our evening, I just want to acknowledge that Chris Milano, who is the co-editor of God's Quad and Information Via Paulist Priest, is with us this evening. So thank you, Chris, for joining us and sharing your work, with this book. And I also wanted to let people know that as you're possibly inspired this evening, Today's American Catholic, we're trying to organize some online Zoom small Christian communities, kind of faith sharing groups. We just did an event with two authors of a book called Ponder that do contemplative Bible study. So we're trying to provide those kind of opportunities. So just some things to note. And we'll also have I will put in the chat momentarily a link to, if you're interested in purchasing God's Quad, we have a 30% offer kindly from Orbis Books. So maybe I'll just begin, because I kind of have something that came up for me as you were all talking. And Kevin, it kind of relates to, I believe I mentioned to you previously, you wrote that article for US Catholic, and there was something that stood out to me about not all students identifying with the current model of the current evangelical model of certain campus ministry programs. And as I heard the three of you, I'm just wondering if we could maybe drill down into what is working, what's not working, what younger Catholics coming up would like to see that's not being included, ministries, people that are not being properly reached out to. If there are certain, I don't know, one idea that came to me was, is the Catholic Church properly addressing the student debt crisis? Is that something we could bring voices into and start to have some accountability around that, and we could be a force for good on that front? So just any thoughts about the current state of campus ministry? Whoever would like to begin.
I think we could talk a lot about the economic dimensions, especially after college, but also of working students and how busy they are and unable to participate in active life. I'm thinking, I have a lot of students where I teach now who are first generation college students. They're probably the most interested in identifying actively as Catholic, but many of them are taking more than the usual share of classes. They're commuters, and they're working, and they're not on campus when Mass is happening. They're not around when events are happening. So when Paulina was saying we need to think about hybrid models, right? One maybe positive, if I could say, side effect from COVID has been the opportunity to do events like this, right? And the familiarity with this, right? So I think some campuses are continuing. I can think of at least 3 campus ministries who were forced to move small faith sharing groups online, but they're continuing those models in some degree, even though they've come back to in-person classes, because students just might be commuters and they might not be around. I think that's really maybe a positive sign. But we go back to the numbers. A lot of campus ministries, if we use that, and I'm not always that comfortable with the term campus ministry or any lay ministry, because I think it centers, and forgive me, we have Mike St. Pierre. I see Mike St. Pierre here from the Catholic Campus Ministry Association, who was also a contributor for our book. But I think the challenge with the term ministry is that it often can tend to center around the minister, and rather than center around the old-fashioned word apostolate, right? The Second Vatican Council uses the word the lay apostolate, or the youth or the student apostolate, right? Which is the sense that every member is an active part of that. They're all, as Father Joe said, apostles to each other, right? But we see on several campuses what others have identified as the outsourcing of ministry, where there might be a packaged model, or there might be a lay group or a church-related group that sends groups in that have one model of being church. But if that's not your model of being church, then where do you go? But those are places where there are things. I'm thinking of the places where there's nothing. And oftentimes those places where there are things are, the students look like me. The places where there's nothing, the students don't look like me. And I think we have a real challenge on that, back to the diversity question. And that's just in the US context, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Kevin. That's excellent. Yeah, I noticed in one of the books that I've been reading about Dominican University has kind of a special outreach program for students of color that maybe could be emulated in other places. Paulina, do you have anything to add to that? What maybe worked for you in your experience, or places where, frankly, people could be doing better? Anything you'd like to add?
That's definitely where I would have taken my answer as well. I think addressing diversity and just spreading the message, conveying the message to everyone to feel invited. I think there was a lot of, even at Yale, at STM, the Catholic community there, it felt like really only a certain type of student was really involved in the community also. So it was like, you would kind of ask yourself, sort of, I don't know, what is my place here? What could I bring here? And overall, it was an amazing sort of vibe, if you will. It definitely felt welcoming, but I don't think that that everyone felt as invited as the next person. I think there was just sort of considerations that weren't necessarily taken into account. It's sort of like, if you feel like it, join us. But I think invitations need to be more explicitly extended to people, and support for the people who maybe have more time constraints, or, as all those examples that you mentioned, maybe taking on more classes, maybe have more student jobs, or simply maybe don't look like everyone else who's participating in the Catholic community.
Excellent. I make that little extra effort. I see Barb has a hand up. Father Joe, before we get to Barb's question, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Well, I'd
point?
like to just suggest, as we look at the variety, rich variety of like campus ministry models or parish small Christian community models, I like to think of it as both and. And I love the Spanish proverb that says, we create the path by walking. So let's discover new things. And that's what the Pope says to the young people. Dream, dream. And I think that's a good encouragement.
Definitely. Barb Bourne, if you'd like to unmute yourself and go ahead, please. What's on?
Yeah, one thing we're seeing here, I'm in the Los Angeles area. I know the school where I went to school at, and it's been taken over by Focus, and anything else pretty much is not welcomed. Also, where I live now, there's a university nearby. Focus again is there, but they're also very active in the local parish. And the problem is, if those of us that don't feel really allied with the Focus ideology, shall we say, how we really communicate that we have maybe a small group, maybe we have a service project. I know some of us here locally are very engaged and want to promote Laudato Si, but the channels to really let people know, whether it's at our parish, whether it's those of us that are alumni of particular universities, how do we really let other people know and communicate? That has been a very, very challenging issue. And especially concerning here too is how the Archbishop is funding bringing in these Focus missionaries who have very minimal training and promote a very specific ideology that other voices are really not welcome. So it's sort of a mix of these kind of issues that really present a challenge, not just for the young adult, but for even those of us that have now are above the young adult age. It's sort of a systemic issue that I think we're all engaged in the same challenge.
Interesting. Because it seems like I know a Laudato Si group, it seems like there'd be a natural incubator on college campuses for people that would be interested in environmental issues. So I'm wondering if there's any of the panelists would think about ways of maybe helping Barb connect her message to local campus communities. I'm not sure. Are you working, Barb, within like the Laudato Si action, the climate plan, or anything like a formal organization, or it's just you're doing this kind of independently?
I'm involved personally with Laudato Si movement.
Nice.
But we did have a creation sustainability ministry here in the Archdiocese of LA that was very vibrant. But when Archbishop Gomez came in, we got really no support. And then eventually in 2017, they disbanded us and said that they only wanted to work on life issues, and to do anything like on care for creation would distract from that. So we are just basically doing grassroots on the ground here now.
Okay. That sounds like great work. And I see a hand. Did someone have, was it Leo maybe has a response?
Right. I've had experience of working with people coming overseas to on pilgrimages through Central America, adults, and to Jamaica, coming students from various colleges and high schools, spending a week to 2 weeks at an orphanage in Montego Bay. And these students, through prayer, through reflections, and being involved with these children that are marginated, orphans, and sick, they touch deeply. And so you have a transformation of the individuals. Often we can go to mass and go home and have breakfast and so forth, just another, we fulfill their obligations. That's not always true, but I find that young people coming overseas in short-term excursion trips get moved and deeply touched, and actually I think they transform their faith and their involvement with what the church is all about. So I would encourage that. You have talked a lot about university students and chaplaincies, and this is an extension of all of that. I've found over the years big groups coming down to Blessed Assurance, maybe some of you have, in Jamaica, where there's 13 orphanages on the island, all run by a Catholic program. And the students, maybe 30 or 40 groups of students come from secular and Catholic universities and high schools. And I see a big change. I see students who come who are football players and athletes, and they're leaving the campus with tears in their eyes. So that type of experience, I think, is a very rich religious experience for these young people.
Thank you, Leo. It speaks to kind of what Barb was talking about. Maybe there's an answer there for her idea of personal conversion, trying to bring people into the environmental movement, maybe going out to just talking with younger students one-on-one, even if there's not a structure in place, just starting with individual conversations and points of conversion. I see a hand, Peter.
So I'm wondering if the three of you might comment about whether you feel that groups should be homogeneous age-wise, which I'm kind of hearing today, or if they should be integrated with old and young together.
That's a really good question. I know we think a lot about the different generations of the Catholic Church, and are they as exclusive as we sometimes think they are. I know we think about, post-Vatican II and then millennial and all these, but there's probably places of common, obviously there has to be places of convergence. So maybe the panelists could speak to that.
Really briefly, I think it's both and. So one of the things we realized in the work that I do with the International Movement of Catholic Students, in many different countries, the student leaders, when they were former student leaders, they created associations of Catholic professionals or lawyers or doctors. The reason to have the separation is so students and young people could create their own voices and their own leadership and become their own people and be with their social group. When they get into the professional world, we've now realized in many countries that it's important to have groups specifically for young professionals where they can meet small communities or small networks, and takes down different forms. So this way they can connect with one another, but to be also part of a wider network, a network within a wider network, right? So they can meet together, but maybe once every few months they meet with others for intergenerational liturgy, but they meet every week on their own for something like that, or once a year they meet all together for a potluck. That's been a really successful model that we've seen that has been good. But in order to do dialogue, and the same with interreligious dialogue or intergenerational dialogue, you need to have confidence in your own group identity and your own space first. At least that's kind of been our experience. But Paulina seemed to agree with that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think both formats are needed. Just to speak to give sort of support for the intergenerational piece as well. For so many of us young adults, I feel like we're in very just transitory stages. We don't know how long we'll live in a certain place. Everything is new for the most part. So having someone who already has roots set in some place or in some community is so invaluable. I experienced that with Angela, who was a longtime member of STM, and just speaking with her, I felt connected to just the history of the place, the social network of the place. It was so important, I think. Also in just understanding different, just for every reason, it was amazing.
And it speaks a bit to what you were saying, Pauline, earlier about guardrails into the next stage of one's life. And I know that Johns Hopkins, I believe, Kevin can maybe attest to this, has a really good, they kind of bring students into the parish life and have that sense right away. I see a few hands. I see, I believe Tom was in line. Tom, would you like to share?
Sure. Thank you all so much. This is really enriching. A wonder I had in July, I think it's July 2024, there's going to be a Eucharistic revival in Indianapolis. And given that the Eucharist is a source and summit of our faith, of Catholic faith, I wonder what youth small Christian communities, the international movement of Catholic students, or other similar groups might contribute to that. How could like I say, small Christian communities contribute to maybe a richer understanding of the Eucharist, or a sense of the Eucharist that would appeal broadly, say at Catholic universities? So I wonder if that is an opportunity for this group and similar people to reflect on what does that mean? What might that mean for us? And by the way, I'm at Loyola University here in New Orleans, and kind of wrestling with the same issues. But like I say, could that Eucharistic revival be an opportunity for us to think about what would a Eucharistic revival look like at Loyola in a Loyola context, given our demographics and our students? So that's something that I've been thinking about. I don't know if you all would have any thoughts about that.
Maybe I could start. And again, going back to our both hand, you'll be hearing me say this many times. And our hope from at least the African church, we see the Eucharist as essential. And we use that quote that Tom mentioned from the Vatican Council. And we also see the liturgy of the word as essential. So in the small Christian community, we read the gospel of the following Sunday and then apply it to our daily life. But then when we go to the Sunday Mass, the small Christian communities in the geographical area go together and they receive together, and they consider themselves a small Eucharistic community. So I would be delighted if our network of small Christian communities could be invited to Indianapolis to show the links between the Word of God and the Eucharist.
I would just say, I think that's an excellent question, Tom. I think the first reaction that a number of the people I know would be, why are we spending so much money on that? And why isn't that when there are no resources to empower local communities, right? So that's something a lot of people will ask, right? When you look at the price tag of what's being proposed for that. I think rethinking what it means to be Eucharist is something that a lot of small Christian communities have done for many, many years. And I'm sure others here have done that, right? That it's not, the Eucharist is more powerful than what we can put into a revival, perhaps. But one of the phenomenon we see, and this has happened with the advent of World Youth Days and other large-scale hyper-emotive events, is that a lot of funding goes into them. And now I've been to 6 World Youth Days. I was on the planning committee in Rome for 3 of them. or for two of them, but that a lot of funding goes into these big events, but then to the detriment of the local churches and local communities, and funding is taken away from local, and that's a real challenge in the way the church approaches these youth ministries, right? And the way we think, but it's part of it's part of our culture. Maybe it's speaking to our culture, but I would say that my reaction to that would be and this maybe gets to the comment that I see from Greg Darr in the chat about the polarizations, and a lot of behind this, and Barb's comment about focus. There's a lot of polarizations here that we have to be aware of and name and just lament, perhaps, and try to think, how can we work through? Maybe the Eucharist is a way to do that. One of the founders of the Catholic Student Movement, International Movement of Catholic Students, Pier Giorgio Frassati, who's up for sainthood, he talked about how he would visit Jesus, he would visit Christ every day in Holy Communion and thank him in a small way by visiting the poor, right? How do we link that experience that Father Leo said of people going to Mustard Seeds in Jamaica or another community, other experiences of service with the Eucharist, linking the liturgy and social justice, linking experience, finding ways of getting out there. I don't know, Paulina, if you have thoughts on that, because like, how do we bridge those pigeonholes that young people are often forced into?
Agreed. I think just a simple blanket statement for a lot of the just different components of the church and Catholicism. I think having a format where we can discuss, as Father just said, just in our own terms, what these things mean to us, I think is invaluable, because we sort of grow up somewhat, to a certain degree, a bit like passively, engage in sacraments a bit passively. Sometimes Mass, it's just, if we have time for it, we'll go, and that's great. But as soon as we're sort of engaging on a more critical level, asking ourselves, what do these things mean to me? How do they serve me, and vice versa? That's, I think, where there's major progress to be made.
Michael, if I could suggest, there's a very important question in the chat, and it's
Yes.
directed toward Paulina, and it follows what she was just saying. Could we use that, please?
Was this from Gregory Darr, correct?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, I'll read it. It was Kevin alluded to it, but it's a very important question. Gregory says, I just wanted to note that there's a broad perception of the polarization of the U.S. Catholic Church. Do young adults perceive the U.S. Church in a similar way? If not, how can their perspective inform how we overcome this perception? And if they do, how do they navigate those polarities within their own generational cohort? What can we learn? So that's, a very rich question.
Yeah, I think that's a big question. And I would sort of echo what I mentioned in terms of, I think we have to have more conversations within this generational cohort ourselves to sort of also understand where other people are coming from. I can't say that I feel very familiar with views that are different from mine, because I think as an adult, I've engaged with my faith, with my Yale cohort, which is probably very different from a Loyola or any other university. I think you're like-minded to a certain degree. So I think opening up spaces for conversation and more critical engagement with current issues, and just sort of updating these things, I think that we've been sort of taught, or things that we've inherited. So it's a pretty vague answer, but I think thinking critically and more discussions within the generation are very important.
No, I like what you said about, not being passive, but trying to be a more active thing. Angela Crowley, I see your hand.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you to our speakers for doing an extraordinary job. And I just wanted to say it was really joyful to be a mentor for Paulina. And I really have to pick up again on Father Joe's comment about the youth from long ago, because I don't feel that different than I did when I was, or think that differently. Or I think with greater wisdom, actually, not older. And I'm not sure that older means conservative and not open. I think there are young people who are more conservative than I am. But I think there's so much to learn. I respect that young people need to have their own time together, but I think integrating at times is incredibly important, because I think those of us who somehow have stayed in the church connected, I think the question for the young people would be, well, why? Why did you choose to do this? What is it that draws you in? And I would say that one thing that has certainly kept me connected is being SCC, and being part of SCC, particularly in the model that Father Bob Beloin promoted for decades. I was a very busy Yale professor, researcher, healthcare provider who had very, very little time every week. And so it's not unlike the young person, but that hour, hour and a half was very, very special when it's done well. It almost felt in some ways like meditation, that we would come out and we would feel calmer. But I think what the magic, the beauty, what's extraordinary about it is it's study, pray, act. And it's about all of these things that you are talking about here, but it really does go back to the scripture, connecting with others, caring about others, and then thinking about this during the week. And how do we then take this and put it into action? So I think, doing it really does all of that. And I would like to see more connection, much more, with young people, and lots of connecting and really helping them with all of this too. So I can see these layers. I think Kevin talked about that, about the connecting at periods of time. So this has been a very rich discussion. Thank you all.
Michael, I'm sorry I'm biased, but we have a hand from a young adult in Kenya, Africa. Could we ask him to join us, please?
Certainly, Alois, what's on your mind?
Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Alois Nyakundi from Kenya. It's 1 a.m. here in Kenya. And so I see, yeah, but I also see other young people from Africa who have joined them. And I'm so happy to see that. And it tells me how they value this event today. So I am a facilitator of small Christian communities for young people here in Africa. And I facilitate online small Christian communities for young people. And like now we have an international group of young people who meet online twice a month. It's called the Online Young Adult Seeker Small Christian Community. And it's good I mentioned about this because Kevin, at some point you mentioned, how we can try to reach out to the marginalized communities, all those groups that don't have a lot of resources. And one of the practical ways I have seen that happening for the online young adult small Christian community gathering that I facilitate. 2 weeks ago, we had a retreat. It was an online retreat. And Joe Healey facilitated that retreat. And one thing that fascinated me about this retreat is because most of the young people in our communities, they don't have a lot of money to travel to a specific place to have a retreat or spend a night or 2 nights somewhere to have a retreat. But then we had an idea of having an online retreat, something many young people have never thought about. For example, one young person from Pakistan called Ashik, he said he always thought that retreats are meant for priests, the sisters, all the people who work within the Catholic Church. He never thought that, there are retreats even for young people. And so we had a 2-hour retreat. It was on Zoom. And so one of the things that excited the young people is where the facilitator, that's Joe Healey, he asked the young people, just take some time and imagine you are seated next to Jesus Christ, or you're walking with Jesus Christ. And I think this really made young people to be excited because it gave us an opportunity to think that, you know, Jesus is our close friend, is our neighbor. We are walking with him in our daily struggles. And something else I've realized, and as a young person that has been very helpful, is to have mentorship programs or having mentors who can mentor young people. And for me, I give a real testimony because Healey has been a mentor for me for about 10 to 12 years. And we have walked a long journey together. And he has helped me to network. He has helped me to know many things in the world, which I don't think I could have ever known if I didn't have somebody of his stature. So I think also mentorship programs are very important, and reaching out to young people through small Christian communities and creating that space for them to come and interact with other young people and other people, not necessarily young people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alois, and thank you, Angela, for that beautiful invocation of SCCs. I like how both of you was almost, we heard it from the different perspectives of someone who had been mentored and someone who was a mentor. So I liked how those two mirrored each other. Thank you both. I think we have time for a few more questions. I see Bev and then Kathleen, and then maybe we could circle back to Barb. So Bev, did you want to unmute yourself? And
okay, I can't help but think, listening to this conversation, and I know that the topic was campus ministry, okay, and small Christian communities in that setting, but it brought me back to the late 70s when I was studying the rite of Christian initiation of adults and had the question of what were we initiating people into? Is there an adult faith community that these young people can become part of? And I'm thinking so much of what was said tonight can also be applied to what we need to do, as some people refer to the older aged people in our communities. And the mentoring, all of that is so much a part that we need to work on that so that these people leaving campus ministries have something to go into. And I see the small Christian community as being one of the biggest positive moves since the late 70s, early 80s, to actually address the rite of Christian initiation for adults.
very interesting. Yeah. Would any of the panelists like to respond to that? Maybe what they've learned or their own experience with SCCs? This idea of mentoring, almost like a an initiation ritual, kind of bringing people along.
Well, specifically on that point, Michael referred to a book that I was involved in called Small Christian Communities Capturing the New Moment. And in that book, Brother Bob Moriarty, who was the head of the Hartford, Connecticut Archdiocesan Small Christian Community Office for many years, had a full chapter on the relationship between RCIA and small Christian communities. Beautiful chapter.
Interesting.
I think, Beverly, your comments are very, very important, because I think the way in which young people are engaging the church is, and the way in which the youth apostolate or the student apostolate is existing, is a good bellwether for the health of the church as a whole. And I think as this is struggling, and I can tell you mass attendance at various places, participation at various places, even big campus ministries like big Jesuit schools, as that's dwindling, I worry about what the future of this church community is as a father of 3 little kids. And so I can also say that my wife and I participate in an online small Christian community, and everyone in the group has a graduate degree in theology, and none of us feel welcome in any local church. And what does that say? I think that's a real warning sign how do we reanimate the church? But it's hard. Many of us feel more connected to the church globally than we do to our local parish. And I think that's also a whole other, so there are a lot of issues I think you're probably raising in that. I know, Paulina, we've talked a little bit about that too in New York, but.
That's a really interesting point, Kevin, this idea of a kind of a global affinity and what does that point to, and thinking about a community of communities and decentralization versus, unification. And we're at a real turning point, it feels. Maybe Kathleen, and then I know Maggie, Maggie's calling in from the UK, so maybe we'll let Maggie, because I know it's late there, but Kathleen, if you'd like to speak first.
Okay, and I will not turn on my video. I have COVID, so I'm not at my best. I think I live on the far right side of that continuum that Barb mentioned earlier, but I appreciate the fact that I'm welcome here. I'm an ordained Roman Catholic woman priest, and one of 3 who lead an intentional community outside of Philadelphia that has pretty much tripled in size as a result of the pandemic. And our community is now hybrid and international. So I share that by way of background. But as I think about what would need to happen for me, I think when we talk about people being empowered to be part of small Christian communities, there's a permission element. But then as they see that and they read scripture and they pray together and they act together and they eat together, to me, that is Eucharist. And I think we need to look at things like inclusive language and the fact that maybe those communities could be local, but also maybe they can be international. That's all.
Thank you, Kathleen. That's an excellent point. Table fellowship, global table, the table at the top of the world, as it were. Maggie.
Hi, hello everybody. I apologize for joining you late, but I got my timings and the spring summertime mixed up. I'm calling you from London, and I am part of a group called Root and Branch. I'm one of the core members of that. And Root and Branch, we have recently set up a platform called Spirit Unbounded. And the purpose of that platform is to bring networks of networks together. So I was going back to what you said, Kevin. Often we feel more connected to a global church than we do to our local parish church. And I think that's something that is echoed right across the globe, and certainly with the people that are connecting with us. I mean, I myself, I would not feel particularly comfortable in my local church, but I have a much more intimate relationship with what we call our DIY groups, which are our small Christian communities, but we call it do-it-yourself, something similar to what Kathleen, I think, was referring to. But I think, the elephant is in the room here, and I think there has been betrayal. There has been huge betrayal of the people by the church, by the institutional church. And that has done a lot of damage. And we're in a different world now, in a different time. We're in the age of information. And so we can question and we think in a more sophisticated way. And we're not, gone are the days of pay, pray, and obey. That's not going to cut it anymore. I have 2 lovely sons in their 20s. They're very good people, and they're involved in social justice, but they don't feel that the hierarchical church is relevant to them. Their church is on social media. They reach out and they connect that way. One of the DIY groups that I'm in is an online group, and I know one of the members of that is here today. And we meet usually on a weekly basis. I've not been able to attend every week lately because of other work I'm doing, but the way in which we explore and look and challenge and look at what history tells us, what archaeology tells us. We question the theology that we've been taught, and we know that there are gaps. But mostly it's the dissonance between the way we live and who we view as our neighbor, and yet what we read and can see in the Bible as, or in scripture, as what is not acceptable. So there is a dissonance there that needs to be looked at. To Pauline, you were talking about the lack of diversity within your groups, and I absolutely get that. Certainly in my area, lots of people looked just like me, but I took myself off to a gospel choir. And so we have the most wonderful evenings, but it is the greatest mixture of people of faith, but who don't all look like me, which is wonderful. And we're a mixed group in terms of age as well. So I think it means we have to be prepared to move outside of our own comfort zones. We cannot be passengers. Change will not come to us. We need to go out there and make it happen. I hope you will all check out our Spirit Unbounded site. I'd love to have you on board. We're doing something exciting in Rome in October at the same time as the Synod. Watch this space. But I think it's fantastic what you're doing, and I apologize for missing the first speakers. I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, we'll have a recording so you can catch up. And Spirit Unbounded is a fantastic group. We're a companion on the road with them at TAC, and they're doing tremendous work. So, any of the panelists, anything stir for you with those comments? Or I see Barb's hands up. We can circle back to Barb's question too. I'll just give you guys a moment if you want to respond to anything there. We're okay. Okay. Barb.
Yeah, just a couple of quick observations. I think the one about the Eucharistic revival, that we probably all have sticker shock and wondered how that money could be better spent. But also, I think we have to be very attuned to who is financing a lot of that. Groups like our Sunday Visitor, Franciscan University of Steubenville, Augustine Institute, again, all of a similar genre are participating. And then what's concerning, I get their weekly emails, and how the emails are very Eurocentric just by the art they show. And I've actually sent them some commentary. I said, we are a very diverse church, especially here in the Western US, yet everything you seem to pull out is all this Eurocentric perspective, and the people that are making the commentaries all look very similar. And I think that's something to be aware of as we move forward. And a second observation, there was talking about intergenerational sort of mingling together, and how is that going to be fruitful or not. But I think there's some very concerning examples of that. And I would use the analogy that basically the older adults are grooming younger adults into their sort of narrow pre-Vatican II almost perspective. And I think some of the groups that are doing that we're seeing is the Tepeyac Institute that came out of the Diocese of Phoenix with Bishop Olmsted. It's now its own nonprofit. There is a heavy Opus Dei presence in it. The director is Opus Dei, and many of the other affiliated people are. The head of Napa Institute is on their board. And another group is Lenomi Fellows, which came out of the Catholic Information Center in DC. Again, another Opus Dei group. They have cohorts in New York City now and also in Los Angeles. And as I said, these groups basically are grooming a select group of young people to be leaders in the church moving forward. And they're not really listening to the young people. They are telling them, where they should go, what they should do if they want to, sort of be in the power structure, shall we say. So just to be aware of those kinds of entities that are around and out there and lurking in the shadows of our church, unfortunately.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you for that. Well, just a couple comments in the chat. One from Cliff: parishes are sacrament factories, in quotes, but need to also focus on community for all people generations. So agreed. One thing I think we're hearing this evening is this dual need for contemplation and community, and how those run together. And then from Nicole D'Entremont, maybe we should be looking more towards small ecumenical Christian communities. I feel more Catholic when I worship with many faiths. So, amen. That's nicely said. So we're kind of at, I know we've gone a little 20 minutes past our perhaps intended hour, but this is a very lively and rich discussion. I don't know if our panelists have any remarks they'd like to conclude with, or if there are any last minute or final thoughts from anyone in the attending this evening. And
I think I want to thank Today's American Catholic. I think there's a lot of really interesting. I find a lot of hope in what you're doing and other allied groups there. I just maybe to share a comment that I received today from a campus ministry in a different part of the country. We seek to serve the declining number of students with a strong religious affiliation while also creating methods to spiritually accompany the majority of students with loose identified affiliations. So the terrain is changing, right? Young adults and young people are still interested in I think the deeper meanings. We just have to listen to them and have to accompany them and find a way, not tell them what to do, but accompany them. So I appreciate this experience of accompanying here, and we have to open up for creativity, and maybe that's what synodality is all about.
Definitely. Synodal, yeah, it's opened up a whole new way of thinking and being within the church. So we have to be there for it. Paulina or Father Joe, any final thoughts you'd like to offer us? Or
Paulina?
There's a lot to
Yeah,
digest.
just thank you to everyone. It's definitely everything that we're talking about is possible thanks to people like yourselves. So thank you. I think I would just encourage all of us to have more intergenerational conversations if it's not already built into our everyday lives. I think it's so enriching, and in a Catholic context, especially. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
As we ask, what is the Spirit saying to the churches? As a youth from a long time ago, I was a strong member of the National Small Christian Community Organizations in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and several of them collapsed, others kind of went morbid. So I really appreciate that today's American Catholic is taking the leadership now and bringing us together and has a plan to help us move to the future. So thank you, Michael, and your team.
Thank you, Father Joe, and thank you to all our panelists and to everyone who attended this evening. I mean, we all have a lot to meditate and pray on, and as we work to kind of build this beloved community. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have more events in the next few months. So God bless and thank you again. Good night.